Brief introduction. So we are the Grosvenor Group. We've joined forces with McIntyre Hudson or MHL LLP, who are one of the UK's leading accountancy and tax specialists. They've implemented many salary sacrifice schemes over the last probably 15 years or so since it was first formed. So we've joined with them to launch our own salary sacrifice scheme. So Grosvenor, we were established 40 years ago. We are the largest privately owned fleet management and contract hire company in the UK, with 18 or so thousand contract hire and fleet managed vehicles. Winners of many awards, which we're very proud of. So there's a few images at the bottom there. The group, from a fleet perspective, is primarily made up of Grosvenor Contracts, Leasing and Interactive Fleet Management. But we also have a Vauxhall franchise, York Wharton Rowlett, and a used car supermarket as well. So why are we here today? So I guess due to the tax haven available really on ultra low emission vehicles, particularly battery electric vehicles, which attract zero benefit in kind tax at the moment until April next year, and very little for the next 5 years, a maximum of 2%. There's been a bit of a resurgence in salary sacrifice schemes. It's widely regarded now as a fantastic way of getting people into ultra low emission vehicles. Because of this, there's a bit of upward demand from employees to introduce these sorts of schemes. From obviously a cost perspective, but also, we're becoming increasingly aware of the environmental impact and our carbon footprint. And I think, particularly during lockdown, it's been widely reported the improvements in air quality, and I think people are perhaps reconsidering, what type of vehicle they need, and people that perhaps haven't considered electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles in the past, I think these vehicles are more and more feasible than ever now, there's more demand for them, and salary sacrifice scheme is a great way to source one. There are, as mentioned, there's huge savings available to the employee. It is a cheap way of getting an ultra low emission vehicle, and of course for the employer as well. Company cars, particularly low emission vehicles, are a very tax efficient way of remunerating employees, and there are savings available to both. It's from a remuneration and recruitment perspective, it's a very attractive, flexible benefit scheme as well. So it ticks all of the boxes. And of course, as mentioned, things have changed as a result of the pandemic and COVID. And like I say, people are perhaps more the plug-in hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles are more feasible to people, because we're all doing meetings from home and not travelling the length of the country like we were before. Ozone is our innovative consultancy solution, which we use to go out and help our customers introduce and embrace the ultra low emission concept. So that's been running for nearly 10 years now. It's been very successful with lots of our customers. Moving on, just a brief overview of today's agenda. So Nigel will take over in a moment to talk you through the concept of salary sacrifice and how it works. I will then take back the reins to talk you through the financials, show how the savings are arrived at, and then Nigel will talk you through the more operational side of the schemes, how it can be implemented, what the considerations are, and so on. And then we will just touch on some of the additional services, the benefits of implementing a scheme with us in conjunction with McIntyre's. A few more samples at the end, and hopefully a bit of time for some questions and answers. So, moving on, Nigel, would you like to talk us through the concept, please?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lee. So as you said, and thanks for the introduction, and great to be working with Grosvenor and Ozone where I think there's a real alignment in relation to the focus of salary sacrifice, which in itself isn't new. I mean, salary sacrifice was first looked at back in 2007 when the legislation was changing from 2008 regarding QualX, that's qualifying low emission cars. So that was cars sub 120 grams of CO2, seems a long time ago now, and where there was a 10% benefit in kind. So the normal benefit in kind is 15, or back then was 15 to 35% of list price. And this was a special band of vehicles that would only be taxed at 10% of list price, as an encouragement from the government to get people into low emission vehicles, as it was at the time. And that was initially seen as a very good added value benefit for employees. And in fact, the first scheme that I put in was for the University of Cambridge, who at the time had no fleets, had no company cars, but saw this as a really good opportunity to help their employees into a green car that had got some significant tax and national insurance breaks, and therefore was very financially efficient, as well as good for the environment, and a good added value product to their reward package. The concept of salary sacrifice then morphed really over the years and became part of the general fleet makeup, because obviously there was quite a gap really potentially between the amount sacrificed and the car that replaced that in terms of a taxable benefit. So you might have sacrificed £500 a month, on which tax and NIC was saved both by the employee and the employer, and replace that perhaps with a car that was under the CO2 regime, based at taxed about £350 a month, and therefore, whilst there was still a saving in employee NIC, there was the gap. This gap, in my example, of £150 a month, and that was that worked really well until probably back in 2017. So it was a good sort of 9-10 years run at this before the government brought in some additional legislation called the optional remuneration rule. So the optional remuneration rule said, well, to the extent that we've got this gap, that's going to be another benefit in kind in itself. And so the tax gap kind of went away. We've also had with that the increased taxation of company cars over the years. And the OPRA rules left a little incentive in there for low emission vehicles. It said, actually, this tax gap, this extra benefit won't apply if a vehicle has CO2 emissions of less than 75 grams of CO2. And at the time, that was pretty tricky to find many vehicles that met that criteria. And obviously, benefit in kind taxation has increased greatly over the years. And lots of people, therefore, have sort of moved away from company cars, moved to cash, or the costs have either got higher or the options have got restricted. But as Lee said, we've now got this significant change. So from April 2020, we've got a real change in the taxation of company cars. So to give you an example, before April 2020, even a full electric, a zero emission car was being taxed at 16% of the list price. But from April 2020, that drops to 0%. So that's massive, and carries on down the line. And therefore, a focus on, as Lee has said, ultra low emission vehicles. So that's vehicles sub 50 grams of CO2 that have got some electric range, really fits the criteria and fits the mould very nicely for a resurgent of salary sacrifice. And whether that's still as an added value benefit, whether that's enticing people back from cash into company cars, and whether it's actually helping you to green your fleet. There's a few options there that are available, but certainly the whole concept has kind of re-energized itself because of the way taxation is changed quite significantly, and also the massive additional supply of product into the marketplace. This isn't just about your Tesla S or your Mini E. There's a whole range of vehicles which Lee will touch on later on that are now can go across the range in terms of your fleet requirements, but also in terms of people's personal requirements. And obviously there are significant tax and NIC breaks, which make this a very efficient benefit in kind, a very efficient part of the reward package, and essentially, as we said, as original concept is open to all people. And lockdown has been interesting. Actually, we've seen a lot more clean air out there, because the greenest mile is the one that just isn't travelled at all, of course. But the second greenest mile is the one that's done within an electric vehicle. Really corny, I know, but that is what we're seeing, and I think there's a real desire for that and a real wake-up call that it does make a difference if we're doing less travel or we're doing greener travel to our well-being and the environment and so on and so forth. And interestingly, we're seeing a bit of a nervousness for people to get onto public transport. So actually, we might see more people actually taking a car, whether that's a company car or a personal car, than did previously, because of this whole social distancing and nervousness about the pandemic, etc. So we've kind of got a bit of a mini storm already with what was happening in April and the supply of vehicles, because manufacturers clearly will be fined if they don't put lots of really low emission vehicles into the marketplace. So that's very supply led. But this is an opportunity to actually, look at this and say, well, actually, there's perhaps a new demand as well to meet that supply. And hence, that's kind of the concept. So, it works well from a remuneration perspective, clear recruitment perspective, corporate social responsibility and the green agenda, and also sort of health and safety. If you've got people out there travelling for you on business, then you are still responsible for them when they're doing that business travel. And the best way, the easiest way to manage that as a corporate is if they're in a car that's controlled by you. And that's just pretty much a fact, and therefore supported by a scheme that is both meets all the criteria that salary sacrifice requires as an employment law, as an HR perspective, but also with somebody who's experienced in fleet and fleet management in terms of the delivery of that. So I think that's why we're here. That's the concept. That's what we're talking about. So we've whet your appetite a little bit. So I'll let Lee touch on some of the financials and really why this is so financially good.
Okay, so thank you, Nigel. Very, very insightful. So to show you some of the financials, which I think you'll see are quite compelling. We've got a couple of examples. So what we have here is we have an example of a company that offers a driver a choice of either taking £25,000 basic salary per annum, or they could take a £5,000 pay reduction, if you like, and have a Nissan Leaf Centre, which has a PLMD value of almost £30,000. Company B, conversely, has no car option, and it's just pure salary. So these examples are based on a 3-year, 12,000-mile lease, with, in this example, a rent of £310 per month on contract hire, or £372 including VAT, personal contract hire, both of which include maintenance. So if we just look at company B first, so you can see there, if the driver took the salary option, he'd get his £25,000 per annum. They pay personal tax and national insurance on that, and then of course they pick up the personal lease costs. So we have assumed, of course, that they will go and lease one of these vehicles on a personal contract hire arrangement. So that would give the net disposable income of just over £15,500 per annum. However, if they were to take the pay reduction, the £5,000 salary sacrifice, and take a car in replacement of that, you can see that the personal tax and NI contributions are reduced, and they will, of course, pick up the benefit in kind tax associated with the vehicle, which we have averaged out over the 3 years. So although it's zero for 2020-21, it does increase to 1% next year and 2% the year after. But that's £60 per annum. So it's a very minimal amount. So you can see there, the driver would have £1,600 more disposable income each month. So that effectively means that they're getting that Nissan Leaf for £288 per month, and that's versus the £420 per month that it costs them if they were to do it on personal lease, and of course have to insure it themselves. So £288 per month is very competitive, as you can see. So from the employee's perspective, it's very attractive, and it's a very, very efficient and cheap way of getting yourself an ultra low emission or battery electric vehicle. From the employer's perspective, again, if we just look at company B first for simplicity for me to explain, you can see that they pay the basic salary and they pick up the employer's NI on that, giving them a total cost of £27,000. However, if under a salary sacrifice arrangement, the salary drops to £20,000, again, they pick up the employer's NI, but now, of course, they do pick up the contract hire costs. So we included the disallowed VAT within those costs. So this is the full cost to the employer, and of course they also pick up the employer's Class 1A national insurance on the vehicle benefits, and of course they will then be responsible for insuring the vehicle as well. So we've included those costs. I think it's widely regarded that corporate insurance is cheaper than private insurance, but we left the values the same because I think one sort of common reservation about salary sacrifice is the risk that employees may leave before the lease finishes, and there could be early termination costs associated with that. So what we've done in there is we've built in an extra bit of reserve, if you like, for the companies to take out a gap insurance or accrue for their own sort of reserves to cover any unforeseen termination costs. And as you can see, that actually saves the employer £1,000. So collectively, employee and employer are saving over £1,600, £2,600, should I say, per annum. One thing it is worth noting as well is those savings can be apportioned however the company wishes. In this example, the sacrifice salary could be increased slightly to leave the employee neutral, and all of the savings would then fall under the employer. Or conversely, it could be that the employer says, as long as we're not going to lose any money and we're going to break even, then we're happy for the employee to take all the savings, and they would be able to source that vehicle for significantly less. So it is the savings can be apportioned however the company wishes. Another example. Probably didn't notice, but I have clicked onto the next slide. They're very similar. And this is on a plug-in hybrid vehicle. We've used the BMW 530e M Sport. So similar scenario, but this time we've got a £10,000 salary sacrifice. And again, you can see there that the employee's saving is just shy of £1,400 per month. Or effectively, it means that they're getting that vehicle at a cost of £658 per month. Again, fully insured, fully maintained, fully taxed, so it's complete peace of mind motoring for the employee, which is a great benefit. And the employer saves, in this example, £2,500 per annum. So from a financial perspective, it is quite compelling. And also, one thing we do mention, particularly with ozone, and one of the main benefits of the particularly the battery electric vehicles is the huge fuel costs as well. Huge fuel savings, should I say? Battery electric vehicles, are typically quoted as costing around 4p per mile to run in electricity, and that's versus the sort of 10 to 15p per mile on a combustion engine. So there's also significant fuel savings available as well. So from a financial perspective, I think that's quite sort of self-explanatory really. It is very attractive for both employee and employer, and like I say, it's a fantastic way of getting people into greener vehicles and saving both themselves and the company some money. So, if Nigel, would you like to talk us through the how and why?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lee. So we've kind of touched on the concept and why now is a bit of a perfect storm. We've touched on some of the financials, and they're very attractive. So, in terms of, that's great, so how do we do it and why would we do it now? And so we've touched on some of these things. Clearly, we've got a CO2 based regime that's assisting us. We've got, clearly, we're going to have even more pressure on managing costs within organisations. We just don't know what the full impact of COVID-19 is going to have on businesses, and therefore, as we come out of lockdown through the next normal, as the furlough scheme ends, etc., you know, pressure on business in terms of costs and overheads is obviously going to be, you know, ever increasing. And so, you know, a concept or an opportunity that is obviously very efficient from a remuneration and from a financial perspective, you know, that it just feels like really good timing from that perspective. You know, everybody wants to save the planet. There's a need for businesses to lower their carbon footprint, particularly for the larger organisations who are under pressure to report on that and actually show what they're doing in order to achieve that. And of course, we've got this this whole duty of care issue. You know, I think you know, we've got lots of changes in how people will work. Lots more people will work from home. Lots more businesses will perhaps relocate and downsize, and therefore, you know, this explosion of, you know, when is that travel business travel? When is it commuting? What's our responsibility as an organisation in terms of making sure people are in a vehicle that's fit for purpose and properly insured? What's our corporate social? What's our corporate manslaughter? You know, exposure to that. So actually, you know, keeping on top of that, making sure that we know that even where people are doing less mileage or actually different mileage to what they did before, that they're doing it in the appropriate vehicle, and that we and they are properly covered, both in terms of you know, all of the risks and all of the potential penalties if things perhaps go wrong, which obviously are out there from a grey fleet perspective and a non-supported cash type perspective. So salary sacrifice, we've covered really, you know, what that delivers, and obviously, but making sure that it's right. You know, as we saw. With these arrangements, as they grew over the years from 2008 until they sort of started to fade away a bit with changes in taxation and legislation, is actually it needs to be done right. You know, salary sacrifice needs to be done properly. You need accurate calculations so that there are no nasty surprises or extra charges. You need to be able to be flexible and make sure that arrangement is fit for purpose now and, you know, throughout its life. And we've got some life in this in terms of, you know, our expectation in terms of taxation. Lee's touched on the 0%, 1%, 2% scenario over the next 3 years, but we've probably got 5 or 6 years line of sight where those percentages are still going to be very low. So that benefit in kind, averaging at £60 a month, is going to increase, but not exponentially as we've seen in the past.
They have held it, haven't they, Nigel, for 2 more years at 2%. So we have 5 years limited at 2%, which, you know, is very cheap, particularly on battery electric vehicles.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the point, and that's about, you know, this is something that is worth, you know, fleets looking at and investing in, and understanding that whether you do a 2-year or a 3-year replacement cycle, that you've got sort of 2 or 3 cycles at least where this is still, as you know, going to be very beneficial from a financial perspective, as well as ticking all the other great boxes in terms of corporate social responsibility, green agenda, you know, health and safety, etc., etc. And then obviously being able to manage that. So it's about, you know, getting it right, making sure there's no surprises, being flexible, and having a partner that can help you keep on top of it all and get it right. So that's kind of a summary really of the how and why. If we move on, Lee, to the next slide.
Just quickly, I will just cover off a couple of questions. We've had a couple of attendees ask about the slides and whether we'll be making them available at the end. Yes, of course, we will make sure that that you all receive a copy of the slides at the end over the next, you know, day or two. So yeah. So another thing as well, Nigel, that I will just mention, because I think it's quite important, is, you know, salary sacrifice doesn't necessarily have to be for one car. You can sacrifice salary for 2 cars, 3 cars, can't you, Nigel?
Yeah, we did see a lot of that back in the day, you know, when people first started going into this and they realised that, you know, giving up their very expensive company car but replacing that with 2 very fuel efficient vehicles, you know, one for themselves, one for their spouse, or for the child, or for the nanny, or, you know, it's actually within the same, or maybe even a smaller overall remuneration package and cost to them and their employer. Yeah, it is, you know, there was this whole 2-for-1 concept historically as well. So it has lots of dimensions, and that's why, you know, it needs proper structuring.
Yeah, and another dimension as well. We've done a lot of work with some of our customers over the last few months, really around allowing trade up as well, because from an employee's perspective, if they take themselves or get themselves an electric vehicle with zero benefit in kind tax, versus a standard combustion engine that could be costing them £200-300 in benefit in kind tax per month, or it could be hundreds of pounds more. Why not allow your employees to use that money to get themselves into an electric vehicle, or a better electric vehicle than they perhaps be able to get under your existing grade limits and so on. So yeah, there's an added dimension there really as well, which is quite useful to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so as we said, a great framework, really, a great foundation, as we've touched on, to actually really innovate the fleet and make most of the advantages that are out there, and obviously the desire in terms of the way the government are going, the supply of vehicles into the market. But it's just what we're talking about is something that's obviously has a real core starting point. So the provision we're talking about is a core policy or blueprint or straw man that actually considers the impacts and considers the areas that you need to think about and where the options are in terms of, well, what does the scheme design look like? Who's it going to be for? How are we going to administer it? Which vehicles are we going to have in there? How are we going to manage the regulatory issues? So this isn't a blinkered approach. We see lots of other salary sacrifices, perhaps where there's a bit of a blinkered approach. So whether that's childcare vouchers or cycle to work or what have you, where a provider will come along and say, this is what works for you, that's great, plump, we'll put it in, without thinking about, well, how does that interact with the rest of your remuneration package? How does that help you with the considerations in terms of national minimum wage or national living wage compliance, or the impact of salary sacrifice on your pension arrangements that are already in place, and so on and so forth. So, this is about just talking to you from day one with a structured plan and an existing blueprint with areas where you can sort of flex and vary that for your corporate requirements, but has already thought about all of these considerations for you, has thought about the pitfalls and has got solutions or options for you to manage those. And obviously, as well as happened with flex cars in salary sacrifice cars in the early days, was around saying, well, if this is open to employees who don't already have a company car or cash allowance option, how do we manage the risk, early termination risk, clearly, but who we invite to participate can help to mitigate that. How we build our salary sacrifice can help to mitigate that. How we deal with early termination penalties for employees can deal with that. So there's lots of issues and areas and strategies that we can manage to make this an overall a policy that fits the business's requirements, it opens up all the positives that are available and mitigates the risks already, from day one. Things aren't going to come back and bite us.
Nigel, with just on that point, it's quite a good time to ask this, really, because I think one of the biggest reservations is around the termination. If an employee leaves midway through a contract or whatever, what actually happens? So if the company enters into a 3-year lease, the employee leaves halfway through, what would happen?
So this is and there were lots of smoke and mirrors, I think, in the past around salary sacrifice. Some people deliberately made it look like it was something that it wasn't. And actually, this is a straightforward contract hire arrangement between the supplier and the business, and therefore the business is utilising salary sacrifice to help to fund that to everybody's advantage. And therefore, when the employee leaves, it doesn't mean that the vehicle automatically terminates, of course. So the business has got options in terms of building into its design anyway some funding, some buffer to deal with if somebody does leave and they desire to the business desires to early terminate the vehicle. But the vehicle's there available for reallocation, of course. It's there as a pool vehicle. It's there. Maybe there's there have in the past been some opportunities to novate to the individual. So there's lots of mechanisms to mean that this isn't just oh my God, the employee's left, I've suddenly got a huge liability or a huge issue. No, absolutely not. There are mitigating factors in terms of who we allow to participate, so we manage the risk anyway and how we fund it so that we build up a pot of money. But then it's not an automatic scenario. The employee leaves, well, we've still got a car there. We might be able to utilise that for for the replacement person, or for a pool car or what have you. So there's lots of flexibility.
And should you have to early term it with the leasing company, like we said, you can build up reserves and a bit of fat, if you like, within the calculations for the employer. But also, as we showed in the examples, the employer could be saving £1,000, £2,000 per month. Well, that would easily cover any termination costs anyway. You'll very quickly generate savings that will cover them. So it's much, it does need consideration. I think there will always be enough reserve in there to make sure the company's not out of pocket, and you can reallocate the vehicles.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, it's about being sensible as an employer, with the employees and saying, look, if this gives us an upside in terms of our payroll cost, and we're £1,000, £2,000 a year better off by an employee taking a car rather than taking the cash, then let's be sensible with that money. Let's let's not get carried away and start spending it straight away. Let's think about the opportunity to this is a look at it as some self-insurance type scenario. And actually we can put some money to one side, and then over time we can release that back out to keep the financial controller happy, and that we've got some profit to release into the business every now and again. But it's a scheme that obviously has all of those facets to be able to have the flexibility to manage that. So it's all overall a very positive experience and arrangement, and that's by design. That's by the initial design, builds all of that in.
Good, thank you.
And then just some reflection, I suppose, in terms of, well, what does that mean for our policy? So this slide looks a bit busy, but really where are we at? Well, we've got people who've got a cash or a car entitlement. So what do we do with them? Well, on the one hand, we can give them cash, or we can give them a company car. And as you touched on, Lee, they might just take the benchmark car, or they might want to sort of trade up, and perhaps we can use salary sacrifice to fund that trade up in an efficient way, where it's an ultra low emission vehicle, or they might want to trade down, and they release some extra cash to themselves within the same sort of policy. But actually what we've also got now is thinking about, well, actually sort of the green agenda. So we've got our two extremes. On the one hand, we've got cash, which is, and some business mileage for when they're using their own car, which is, possibly still the least efficient way to do it all, from a financial perspective, and gives us some potential health and safety and corporate governance risks on the one side, all the way through to the other side, saying, well, let's have a whole green car scheme and utilise salary sacrifice and utilise all of these ultra low emission vehicles, providing they're still fit for purpose, of course. This really just demonstrates that this still isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all scenario. There's an increasing part of that fleet makeup, whether that's just employees without cars or people who have business need vehicles or cash allowances, where it's an increasing opportunity to use salary sacrifice and ULEVs to fit that area. But it won't necessarily fit every single class of person that you've got in the business. Just as now, there's no one-size-fits-all. The fleet decision makers will be fully aware that actually, their fleet policy is already, something of a hybrid, and this just takes that hybrid, perhaps simplifies it ever so slightly, and in a very beneficial way, both in terms of the upsides for the individuals, the upsides for the business, the environment, and risk management. So this really just sort of trying to sort of capture, which is very difficult to do in one place. Well, look, your fleet isn't just one thing. It's quite complex.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, as we've touched on, we come to you both with the experience of Grosvenor and Ozone as a very established supplier in the marketplace, and myself and McIntyre Hudson as a very established advisor in the marketplace. And so for me, it's about turning around and saying, look, salary sacrifice, there's the tax and the legal aspects that you've got to plan and get right. There's the communication aspects, because employees have got to know that this is a good thing. So you've got to communicate it to them effectively. And I suppose the jam in the middle of that sandwich is Grosvenor, the provision of the fleet management and the services and the vehicles and so on and so forth. So just an outline really of what a thought out implementation plan is, that obviously is fitted together with that blueprint that we've talked about. So we've got a real solid basis, we've got a blueprint, we've got a plan by design, and then we've got actually, well, that all sounds great. How on earth do we do it? Well, look, here's a starter of an implementation plan that can get things up and running.
And you mentioned the jam in the middle. I mean, that's and that's what we're sort of trying to cover off here. But I'm not a salesperson, so I don't tend to harp on about things just for the sake of selling it. But this, it genuinely does work. The calculations work. It ticks all the boxes from financial to duty of care and risk, and of course environmental. And I think if you can wrap it all in with an established contract hire and fleet management provider like ourselves, you've got a reliable provider there from a fleet perspective. And we've just got a quick slide there that just shows you everything that we do from a fleet management perspective. So you can wrap it all up as well. So you sort of get the best of both worlds, if you like. You get leading compliance, tax, and legal advice with McIntyre's, and of course we like to think the best sort of fleet management service and contract hire through ourselves. So we'll just sort of move on. I mean, we've had some really good questions actually. I have been keeping an eye on it. So there's just a few examples on the screen there. So again, these have been calculated in exactly the same way as the two examples that we showed you earlier on in the presentation. So it's they're just looking at the iPace there on the top left. For a £15,000 salary sacrifice, the employee could effectively get that vehicle for £860 per month, which I think if you go and have a look around, you'll see that's significantly less than what they get it for on a PCH arrangement, and also obviously they have to pick up the insurance cost as well. And there's an employer saving there, £5,200 per annum. And as mentioned, that employer saving could be passed on partially or furthermore to the employee, so they can get the vehicle for less, and the employer saves slightly less. So there's a few quite compelling examples on the screen there. So let's have a look with some of the questions. So the first one, can we give more details of the grey fleet risk aspects? I mean, firstly, I can say, the best way of reducing your grey fleet risk is obviously to get people into company cars that you control. Nigel, have you got any more to add on that?
No, I think I touched on it as I went through. Grey fleet is it is risky for businesses because we perhaps give people cash, or we give them their 45 pence a mile, and do we really know what they're driving and how well maintained it is and how well insured it is? Because we do need to know that if there was an accident and that person said, "Oh yes, I was just off to see a client," even in their own car, or just to a training course in their own car, anything for business, then obviously the corporate, does have a responsibility to understand. And obviously that is very difficult to control and have all of the appropriate checks and balances in place when it's the employee's own car. It kind of, whilst there are systems and processes available, there are great, services available through license check-in and MOT check-in and so on and so forth. Compelling the employee to give you that information is quite tricky and quite a distraction. But obviously, as you say, Lee, where even through salary sacrifice, and even if they're not doing any business mileage, it's a company car, and it's much easier to know because it's a company car also that's provides a fully maintained vehicle. So we know that it's being serviced. We know that it's insured because it's on the corporate policy. We hope that they're checking the tyres and the windscreens and so on and so forth. But that's the same with any vehicle really. So and obviously therefore you manage and mitigate the risk. And this is where fleet managers and fleet management services. That's what they're there for, to take that hassle away from the fleet owner within the business, which often falls more these days to HR and finance than perhaps it used to in the past. So so I think for all those good reasons, company car isn't for everybody, but where it does fit and where salary sacrifice can fit. It just ticks a load of boxes.
So another question, is there employee resistance to reallocated salary sacrifice cars in our experience? I mean, firstly on that point, I would say salary sacrifice cars, particularly these ultra low emission vehicles, would be more attractive as a reallocated vehicle than a combustion engine vehicle with a CO2 of 140 and a P11D of £40,000, which it will cost a huge amount in benefit in kind tax. Versus the Nissan Leaf we mentioned earlier, and any other electric vehicle really. The benefit in kind tax is zero at the moment, and increasing by a very small amount for the next 5 years. So for me, I think a reallocated salary sacrifice car would be very attractive. Nigel, would you agree? Would you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we did see scenarios in the in the early days in phase one of salary sacrifice, as I say, going back sort of 10 years or what have you, where arrangements weren't properly designed, if that makes sense. So and where there wasn't the proper consideration of the vehicles being provided in the first place. And so I remember one case where reallocation was almost impossible because the previous employee decided to take I don't know if people remember them, those bright yellow Fiat coupes, and nobody wanted it. they upped and left after 6 months, and nobody actually wanted that particular car. Sorry,
I know who that was.
Yeah, that's right. But as you say, look, things have moved on massively in terms of those aren't the type of cars that meet the criteria for great salary sacrifice are the types of vehicles that are very attractive to the vast majority of people, and therefore not going to put them off having that on the drive. And obviously they've got big financial benefits. So no, not very much resistance at all. But of course you've got to think about what you're allowing people to order, just in case. Just in case.
And that's the beauty of it. I mean, the company can have as much or as little control over the selection process as they like. I mean, we can obviously help you with all aspects of car policy setting and what manufacturers models you'd like to include. Obviously, you would theoretically be increasing your car fleet. So, we can help with manufacturer negotiations and increase discounts to make it even cheaper. So yes, lots to consider. Would trade-ups, we'll do that one. Would trade-ups be valued at gross or net for the employee, Nigel? That's probably better for you. You're the HR expert.
Yeah, well, the beauty is that if it's a qualifying vehicle and it's not caught by the OPRA rules, which it shouldn't be as a ULEV, then it's obviously at the gross level. Yeah. So that's great. So the actual cost to the employee is much lower.
Would the employee be able to purchase or take over the lease of the vehicle should they leave?
Um, I mean that's that's down to the we have seen that in the past. I mean it's down to the arrangements that you have in place, but we did see scenarios where employees leaving were very keen to move that from a contract hire to a personal contract hire. So whether there's and certainly there can be flexibility in the leasing arrangements to enable that novation. Um, I can't think of very many cases at all, if I'm brutally honest, where individuals were keen to actually physically purchase the vehicle at the end of the day. I've perhaps seen that more in the last couple of years, but for very senior executives who've said, well, actually, I've had a really cheap Tesla as a company car for a few years, and I'll now just buy it at the end of its lease and keep it. But that's kind of that's not really built into the core of the arrangement. It can happen, but more often, what you build into the core of the arrangement is the opportunity such as leasing agreements allow for the employee to move that contract hire vehicle into a PCH.
And then we've got how do savings compare versus vehicles with a higher CO2? I guess anything over 75, there would be no saving because of Opera. Firstly, so yeah, in fact, yeah, you'd probably find that it would be, yeah. That's fair to say. If you get higher and higher, then you'll find that the car benefit increases, and could potentially, depend on how high the CO2 is and how high the P11D value is, you could find that it's perhaps inefficient to do it that way. Nigel, would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, this is aimed primarily at ULEVs, of course, and those sub 50 grams. Just a bit of future proofing, really. I think that Opera 75 gram was brought in 2017, so that could change. That could come down. But let's future proof that and think about sub 50, where we've got some certainty on what the BIK looks like. And I think Lee and I were looking at this yesterday, and we looked at as an example a 330e, which is a hybrid. And I think came out at 12% BIK, and it still, it still worked really very well, didn't it, Lee? I think that's, so it is about making sure you've got the right vehicles in there. But of course, if you're aiming it at ULEVs, you're only going so far in terms of CO2. You're only going so far in terms of benefit in kind percentages, and therefore you'll have a basket of vehicles that works, extremely well. Some better than others, of course.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's, future proofing is quite important, isn't it? I think, and setting the limit at 50, protects employee and employer. So I think it's probably the key to do that. So we have another question just come in. Two questions, in fact. So contracts of employment allow for company car or cash alternatives. I believe that you will now be taxed on the greater of those two sums. Yes, if the vehicle has a CO2 over 75, then yes, you'll be taxed on the greater of the two. If it's under 75, you will be taxed on the car. That's correct, Nigel, isn't it? Under Opera optional remuneration.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I mean, that's why we're looking at a proposition here that is aimed only at the ULEVs that aren't caught by that scenario. So they're not caught by that higher of scenario. That's what Opera did, is it brought in that, well, you're going to be taxed on the higher of. This sidesteps that because it's obviously the legislation says, well, if it's less than 75 grams, that higher of doesn't apply. And of course, we're focusing on ULEVs, which are sub 50 grams of CO2, so it still wouldn't apply. And therefore, that is fine. That's not a problem. And therefore, it does then mean that actually, we are not looking at a wholesale change of contracts of employment. We're looking at this salary sacrifice as a variation. So at the point, clearly employees is signing up to this arrangement, and you'd sign up, to the agreement for the salary deduction, and included within that would be your variation. So we're not issuing wholesale new contracts, which is the second part of the question. We're just varying people's existing terms and conditions in a tax efficient way that doesn't require us to to then keep the extra records of, well, what's the hire of the cash and the BIK on the car, because that goes by the wayside.
In your experience, Nigel, on that point too, would I mean, calculations, are they typically carried out at individual employee level? So they decide on what vehicle they would like, and then you sort of the employer, in conjunction with ourselves and McIntyre's, you would calculate it on an individual basis, would you, I assume?
Yeah, that's right. We can do, or we could just come up with something of a matrix, really. Just turn around and say, well, this is typically what this vehicle will cost, whether you're basic rate or higher rate, or if you're fortunate enough to be an additional rate taxpayer. So yeah, absolutely. But obviously historically, it's been around, accessing those calculations on a on a case by case basis, so people can kind of see, well, this is really what it means to be, and that's important. It's important for the communication and for the visibility to people to understand, what exactly it means to them, it became something that needed the support of lots of technology, as people grew this to cover everything that was out there. So if people have got choice of any one of 4,000 derivatives, then that's quite a feat.
Yeah.
I mean, at the moment, we're looking at this and saying, well, actually, this is still, whilst growing, but quite a defined sort of set of vehicles, and therefore, that those calculations can be easily supported. But similarly, there's lots of great technology out there as well that can do those calculations too. So
spreadsheets.
No, some really lovely systems out there.
Anybody that knows me, I do everything on spreadsheets. Oh, hang on. So we'll do one final question, because I'm aware we have overrun quite a bit now. Can this be introduced for cars already on lease, or would it be for new cars only? So I mean, I guess my thoughts on that is that it's really only available for people that don't have a company car, or would like a second or third company car, and would like to sacrifice their salary for that. That's fair to say, Nigel. Is there anybody that's already in an existing company car? Then it's not really relevant to them, because they're already in one, and they therefore don't need to sacrifice salary to get it, if you like. So it's only applicable to for new cars, if you like. That's fair to say, Nigel.
Yeah, that is fair to say. I mean, if somebody's already in a company car and you're in a contract hire agreement, then you're not going to want to really terminate that, because that can be very expensive. So you're going to look for perhaps when that vehicle's replaced, or obviously, for people who don't currently take a car at the moment, whether that's because they take cash or just because we see it as an added value benefit. So that's primarily where this starts. And as I say, I suspect, historic as happened historically is we start on, those people without a car, moving people back from cash and then it will morph into, as people replace their vehicles, of course, and it becomes an attractive proposition. So I think that's but it isn't a light bulb, it isn't a light switch moment. So it's not like a sale and leaseback type scenario, where which can be advantageous. This I think dumping those existing contracts could be quite expensive.
Sorry, there are a couple of questions we haven't covered, actually. If a driver takes salary sacrifice, but it's purely for personal use and no business mileage, does the employer have a duty of care responsibility? I guess perhaps in as much that they need to make sure that they're selecting. Well, I guess probably not, actually. I mean, duty of care is only relevant for business use, isn't it, Nigel? As far as I'm aware.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's where the penalties kick in, really, is if somebody's using their vehicle on business, and you haven't got sort of the checks and balances in place. So this would be a lighter touch, because obviously this is a company car. We know how it's insured. We know it's maintained, because it's probably going to be a fully maintained contract, and so on and so forth. So, but of course, what we've got to be mindful of is that even if that employee uses that vehicle to drive to a training course, that is business. So that you need to, even though they're not expected to do any business travel, if they did undertake even a very irregular business trip, then clearly you're going to want to undertake that license check, as
And,
you probably should be doing, even if they're
yeah.
doing that in their own car.
And a company car ticks all the boxes from a duty of care responsibility perspective anyway, because the company are insuring it. Between the company, fleet management provider or lease company, they'll be making sure that the vehicle's serviced and MOT'd and taxed. So from a duty of care perspective, even if they do no business mileage, you're ticking the boxes anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Duty of care becomes less of a dirty phrase, really.
Yeah,
If it's a company car, it's much
absolutely
easier to deal with that. Yeah, so it's less of something to worry about.
And finally, what about charges and how payments for electricity are catered for regarding business and private mileage? So, any thoughts on that, Nigel?
Yeah,
I suppose the buck.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Well, I suppose part of some of the other work that we're doing at McIntyre Hudson is around helping the OEMs and dealers, etc., to be EV ready. And so from that, we are aware of a number of providers who who obviously can provide chargers and energy. And I think as time goes by, I mean, it's probably too early for it to be bundled into the salary sacrifice arrangement today. But certainly as time goes by and even with salary sacrifice or outside of that in terms of just company cars anyway, there will be a lot more providers of bundled packages where actually as vehicles become more electrified, then obviously there'll be an even bigger expectation that it's, we're providing, the metal and the maintenance and the charger and the energy. And there are a lot of organisations who, some of those are existing organisations who are setting up sort of, new business within streams within themselves, or just brand new businesses coming to market who are saying, well, actually, we can provide you with that bundled product of, the vehicle and the energy and the charger and and there are people out there already who are doing it on a broker type basis, and they're just kind of putting you in touch with people, and clearly that's something that through the wider contacts we have, we could support with anyway. But it is something that will become part of the norm as time goes by, in that, well, I'm taking an EV, right? Have you got a charger? Have you got the right charger? Or who's your energy with? Who should you perhaps be talking to, etc., etc. So so certainly, trying not to sort of overcomplicate something that's really simple and really effective. But obviously, there are other partners out there who can support with those.
It's probably worth mentioning as well, for anybody that's left. Home chargers they're not taxed at the moment. There's no benefit in kind tax. So if the employer installs a home charging point at the employee's home address, then there is no taxable benefit there at the moment. So that kind of lends itself to salary sacrifice as well, in a way. And there's no taxable benefit for free fuel, free electricity. So if you've got charging points installed at work, your employees can charge their vehicles there. There's no taxable benefit again. So it's it can almost, or certainly to April next year, it can give employees sort of zero cost motoring, if you like, from that perspective.
Absolutely, as a company car.
Yes.
If you pay for it for their private car, then you'll please still get taxed.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. And there was just something else I was going to mention. With regard to fuel rates, the advisory fuel rate for an electric vehicle is currently 4 pence per mile. So if you have an employee using, I assume, does that apply to company and private cars, Nigel? I know it applies to company cars. So if employees are charging their vehicle at home, they can then claim their business miles at 4 pence per mile. Are there any sort of rules around privately owned electric vehicles that are charged at home and then subsequently used for business use?
No, this is the new advisory fuel rate, the E advisory fuel rate. So as with the advisory fuel rates for conventional diesel or petrol or hybrid vehicles, it's about saying, look, if you travel on business in an electric vehicle, full electric vehicle, then there's the 4 pence per mile, and that doesn't matter whether that's a private vehicle or
Right.
company vehicle. But of course, so that's good, and that's certainty for the employer.
Yeah.
And certainly, something that lots of the associations lobbied really hard for, and made some inroads into getting an advisory fuel rate for full electric vehicles.
And plug-in hybrids are treated exactly the same as combustion engine vehicles, aren't they? So if you've got a plug-in hybrid petrol vehicle, you'll claim 10, 12 pence per mile, depending on the engine CC if it's a company car, and up to 45 pence per mile if it's a privately owned plug-in hybrid vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got an engine, so whatever fuels that engine is the AFR rate that you use.
Okay, so we still have 36 people left, which is over half.
Wow.
So how many of them are awake? Who knows? But yeah, thank you all for joining. Hope you've you found some useful points there, and if there's anything that we can help you with, we'll make sure that you have Nigel and my email addresses. If you have any further questions, we will of course send out a copy of the presentation to you all as well. So thank you again for joining. Thank you very much, Nigel, for joining us as well. Very, very insightful and knowledgeable as always. So hopefully we'll see you all again at some point in the future. So have a good day all. Great. And thank you again. Bye bye.
Thanks, Lee. Bye.